Okay, I just want to take a few moments here and talk about learning disabilities and gifted as I've dealt with both during my long career as a teacher. Um, and so I just want to talk about how we can look at these two types of young people that are growing up and maybe what we can do to accommodate each type of student. So first of all, definition of gifted, okay, are they usually have an outstanding talent in some area, and they are usually performing at a higher level than students that are in their same year of school or experience or whatever. And then they're usually specific. Hopefully you watched Ellen Winter's little short video, and she talks about her definition or characteristics of gifted children, and then she talks about the specificity of their gifts. Federal reports state that about 3 to 5% of the general school population is gifted. Bright is a different type of student. These are students that are very competent and sit in a classroom, and the teachers love them because they do their assignments, they do them quite well, and they follow the rules of the classroom. Gifted children often get things done much quicker, and they think outside the box. And so therefore, since they get things finished quickly, they might then stare out the window, daydream, or start reading a book or working on something that does interest them, to the teacher's dismay. Sometimes they require a different atmosphere because their social skills need to be worked on. So there are some schools that are working with gifted children that are not only working with their individual area of developing expertise, but also their social skills to help them navigate the social part of their life. Um, there's definitely a genetic link here. You heard Ellen Winter say that she definitely believes that. She's kind of referring to it without using a specific name of Kay Anders Erickson, who is a researcher that is saying that expertise and excellence comes through what's called deliberate practice. And so genetics doesn't play a huge role in it. However, with intelligence, we know that there is a genetic component. The exact genes are somewhat being debated, but there is definitely nature part to it. But also, we'll see there's also a very nurturing part. Now, we've heard in another talk I gave about vocabulary that there's a difference in environment that people and children are born into. The home observation measurement of the environment inventory just measures the quality and quantity of intellectual stimulation and support that's available to children. So you can look at these types of qualities, access to books, magazines, newspapers. As you look at these, basically you're just looking at how stimulating is the environment and how stimulating are the interactions between the primary caregivers and the child. So they found through this study that it could result in as much as a 9-point difference in IQ. That is, the environment can determine that. Adopted children can show a 12 to 18-point change in IQ when we move from poverty and put into a more nurturing, and we're talking about poverty also being an impoverished home life. Here's the other things that go into our environment, all right, for people to excel. We know that there are very smart people out there, have a high level of intelligence, but they don't do much with it. Well, there's all these other characteristics here that we see that need to be involved with the child's development or the person's development. What motivates them? What are their interests? What do they pay attention to? What's their personality and their attitudes and their values? And also, as we've talked about, some of these individuals can be somewhat quirky. It goes along with Sandra Scar's research with a genotype correlation. In other words, the environment becomes important as far as how that genetic predisposition will express itself, and she called it niche picking. All right. Binet, Alfred Binet, the first intelligence test creator, who's a very interesting person if you want to read a life story. You can't measure someone's IQ or any psychological trait for that matter to the same level of precision as you can measure a person's height or weight. And I think that's what we want to do. We want to have a score that we know is there and it's kind of in cement. But there's a lot of things that go into intelligence testing that could bring about some questions. So one would be measurement error. The person zoned out or was distracted during taking the test. How many times have you taken a test that you haven't done well because you just kind of lost interest in the test? Artificial inflation. The person guessed correctly, or maybe somebody fed them some information. Administration error is huge. 90% of administrators at least report at least one error. All right. 2/3 of those errors resulted in a higher score. A confidence interval, the range of scores that might contain the true IQ score, there is no such thing. So there is no truly confident measure. So it's actually the common confidence interval is 68%. In other words, I really feel that there's a 68% chance that this really tells us the true IQ of this person. Alan Kaufman, you can read his statement there. I'm not going to walk across the street if that's the percentages. Also, test-taking anxiety or test motivation can play into how a person might do on any given day taking an IQ test. There's this incredible range of differences between IQ scores. In other words, you yourself can show a range of IQ scores during your lifetime. It's not set. And these become very high stakes for those that are either going to be classified as gifted or learning disabled. There's always regression to the mean. In other words, I take this test and I do really well on it, and then I give it to me again and I don't do so well. Or I do very poorly and then I do better the second time. Here's what they found, that the same person can take 3 different IQ tests and get this range of scores. Well, these ranges of scores mean a lot of things when it comes to possibly what the child will be exposed to and what advantages they might be afforded. The severe discrepancy is, why am I reading at a low level? Is it because my IQ is low or because my motivation is low? And the unfortunate thing is sometimes this is not accounted for, especially when children are being classified as learning disabled. So 40 to 60% of differences in academic outcomes are not related to IQ scores. Well, what is it? Well, cognitive abilities, their attention, their ability, their memory, and so forth. Others, just student characteristics such as motivation, persistence, self-control, mindset, which I wish we had time to talk about, being the difference between being mindless and mindful and how mindset plays into that. Self-regulation, which we've seen before. Classroom practices, design and delivery of the curriculum, school demographics and community. All of these things play into how well a child might be doing, especially with reading, which plays so much into academic success. IQ and expected achievement regardless of the score. So in other words, let's just take this, 50% will score at or above and 50% will score at or below that score. So say I score a 70. Well, that means that I'm actually will perform possibly at that score or above. If I score at 130, I might perform at 130, or I might score 50% less than that. So we need to be very careful. Robert Sternberg, who is the author of the theory of successful intelligence, or often called the triarchic theory of intelligence, a leader in the field of intelligence, also developed a a test, all right, called the Rainbow Project that they found to be actually a better predictor of student success as a freshman in college than the SAT scores. It has a student write a caption for a cartoon, solve a problem, write a story with a funny title like the Octopus's Sneakers, and it also has lessened the gap between both socioeconomics, strata, and ethnic changes. Um, so very much an expert. The use of difference scores in diagnosing reading disabilities is analogous to building a house of cards. Okay, so you can read the rest. Millions of high-stakes decisions are being made on the basis of a procedure that is flawed and greatly in need of modification. Okay, and so you can read this quote here by Lohman as I talk about the study at the bottom, which is still dealing with now some gifted types of analysis, and they took children in elementary school that scored in the top 3% in reading, math, and language. 1 year later, um, uh, but within 2 years, only about 50% were classified at that level, and by 8th grade, only 35 to 40%. So in other words, there's a change in how we classify students and their abilities that is not once kind of you're at one level, then that's where you are set for the rest of your life. So are you schoolhouse gifted, or are you creative, productive gifted? That's another thing. Wisdom is something that is not only for older people, but they found it in people that are 20, 30, 40, 50. And dyslexia, let's take just one quick look at that. Okay, and what they found is research found that they process information more in their right hemisphere. So they have what they call holistic inspection. In other words, they don't see the center so much as they see the peripheria. So they see things a little different, okay, and therefore analyze them a little bit different. So how does this play out? Well, it seems that they have a high level of communication skills, the ability to delegate responsibilities, ability to read nonverbal facial expressions. And where did this really play out? One researcher did research on entrepreneurs and found that 15% of the general population has dyslexia, but 35% of all entrepreneurs have dyslexia. And we could go through all the corporate executives and so forth. But there's a great quote by a sculptor, John Mishler, who wrote, "Being dyslexic has given me an enhanced imagination, and in my head I see visual images that are often turned into sculptures without any drawings on paper. It took me a long time to realize that being dyslexic was a gift." So in other words, remember that dyslexic people just see things differently. They see the context as much as the content. So maybe perhaps instead of labeling dyslexics learning disabled, we should call them visually gifted. So hopefully this helped a little. It's very short, and of course there's much, much more we can look into this area, but I just wanted to take a moment and address it, and I hope that you watch the Ellen Winter little film, because she is one of the foremost experts in this area.